On a warm Friday autumn morning, October 6, 1944, in Washington, D.C., two caretakers of the East Potomac Park Golf Course were making their morning debris cleanup rounds around 8 a.m. when they stumbled upon a grisly discovery near the sixth hole green. Lying in the midst of disheveled wet grass, just 40 feet from the road that circled the park, was the lifeless body of an extremely petite young woman. The girl-sized figure was lying face up, wearing bobby socks and a brown dress with a red coat over top with large white buttons. In a panic, the men quickly ran off to fetch the police. The two men didn't know it at the time, but they had just happened upon the scene of one of the most infamous domestic crimes that had taken place in America during World War II. Upon their arrival, detectives from the Washington, D.C. Police Department concluded that the victim had valiantly struggled against her assailant. This deduction was made due to the randomly trampled grass, as well as distinct scratches and bruising on her face. A tightly wrapped hair snood, found cinched around the doll-sized corpse's neck, revealed the horrific nature of the strangulation she endured after having been sexually violated. The only piece of identification the police could find on the victim was a senior class ring stamped with the year 1944, the initials DB, and the seal for McDonald High School in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. The three critical questions posed by the police that morning were, who is the victim? Who is the killer? And due to a similar case that happened nearby, were authorities now facing the presence of a mass murderer, the term that was used prior to that of serial killer. Hours after the discovery, and halfway across the country in the Midwest, railroad conductor Roy Barum was on his return trip at the New Richmond, Wisconsin train depot when he was met by police. They calmly informed him that his daughter had been found murdered on a Washington, D.C. golf course, causing him to collapse in sorrow. Meanwhile, back in Chippewa Falls, his wife Mary received the devastating news from an unsolicited call by an East Coast reporter seeking comment. Their suffering was amplified by the realization that daughter Dorothy's death was front-page news across the United States, leading to an overwhelming influx of media inquiries to the family home. The entire family was stunned and deeply upset over the news. Dorothy deserved so much better and so much more in life. She had done everything right up to that point, was a terrific daughter, and had proudly gone out east to serve her country. Dorothy Marie Berrum was born on March 5, 1926, in Fond du Lac County in southeastern Wisconsin. Her parents, Roy and Mary Barum, who had married just a few years earlier, moved their family to the northwestern part of the state, in accordance with work assignments from the Soo Line Railroad. After moving to Chippewa Falls, the family resided in a two-story house on the city's East Hill at 208 South Culver Street. Located on what was known as Catholic Hill, the Barum family lived just blocks away from the city's famed Notre Dame Catholic Church, where they were regular attendees. In the years that followed, 4 other children were added to the growing family: 2 sons, Richard and Homer, and 2 daughters, Mary Catherine and Mary Ann. Roy and Mary were devastated when infant Mary Catherine died of pneumonia just days prior to her first birthday. The youngest child, Mary Ann, was named in honor of her deceased sister. As the oldest child, Dorothy took her position in the family very seriously. Through her school-aged years, she set a very high bar for her siblings, as she excelled in everything that she did. Dorothy was musically gifted, academically motivated, and a naturally fun person to socialize with. Dorothy was well known for her piano skills and played a featured piece in all of her school's musicals, including Finlandia and Happy Hours. She maintained high academic standings throughout her junior and high school years, earning a spot on the honor roll each year. She was a star performer on McDonald High School's debate team, earning high marks for her arguments in favor of the United States joining a reconstituted League of Nations. At graduation, Dorothy ranked in the top 20 of her graduating class. But she was also a social butterfly who served as captain of the school's pep club and was a founding member of the Chippewa Falls chapter of the Busy Fingers Club, a social group for young women that focused on sewing, cooking, dramatic arts, and folk dancing. The Barrum's residence even played host to the group's Halloween party. Despite all of her skills, talents, and involvements, Dorothy was just as easily known for her unique stature. Standing at just 4 foot 5 inches and weighing only 85 pounds, Dorothy was described as being short and stocky, with descriptor words such as midget and doll-like following her most of her life. References to her height even appeared in the school news section of the city's newspaper, which made quips about her being our little sophomore package, and stated that what the pep captain lacks in height will be made up in pep and good leadership. Nicknames like Squirt and Shorty always seemed to follow her in life. Dorothy always took references to her physique with good humor, as people genuinely liked her for who she was as a person. After Dorothy graduated high school in June of 1944, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Ever since Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, killing Chippewa Falls native and fellow East Hill resident Harry Wellington Kramer, Dorothy had wanted to help her country achieve victory. As a student, she helped raise money at McDonell through the nation's Schools at War program, where they achieved the rank of a triple threat school by raising enough money to buy 3 Jeeps for the U.S. Army. Now Dorothy set her sights on passing the civil service exam, so she and 2 of her female friends from the school, Betty Germain and Kathleen Cosgrove, could work for the War Department. All 3 passed the exam easily, and within weeks, the trio had arrived in Washington, D.C. for service. Before she left Chippewa Falls, an emotional goodbye with her parents included expressions of pride and encouragement, reminders of continued prayers and church attendance, and warnings about strangers in the big city. With final hugs and I love yous, Dorothy Berrum left the Chippewa Falls train station for the nation's capital. Back at the crime scene, Washington, D.C. Police Chief Edward Kelly was encouraged by the progress his detectives were making. The victim had been quickly identified, courtesy of leads from the ring they found, as 18-year-old Dorothy Marie Berrum, a U.S. government civil service employee who worked for the Department of War's Ordnance Division. Like the thousands of other young women who worked in D.C. from around the United States, Dorothy had lived in a dormitory on the famous Arlington Farms complex, a wartime government housing center in Virginia. Those who knew her there told the police that she was very intelligent, sociable, upbeat, polite, and a bit naive, a classic out-of-town Midwesterner. The U.S. Army colonel, whom she worked for as a clerk and typist, praised her as an employee and as a person, explaining that she had an apt mind, a quickness for mastering new skills, and displayed a just and friendly, pleasing way. Almost immediately, the press dubbed Dorothy the government girl, with the nickname appearing on front pages of newspapers from coast to coast. Investigators on site continued to find pertinent evidence, including cigarette butts, one with lipstick similar to Dorothy's, and a black leather belt with a noticeably twisted buckle prong. Police immediately recognized it as a standard U.S. Marine Corps issued belt with the name Ernest Tkach printed on it. They quickly reached out to the Department of War, only to find that Ernest Tkach was not in the United States and was likely either in Australia or somewhere in the Pacific Theater. Undeterred, police made arrangements to interview Marines in the various barracks around Washington, D.C. Early the next day, a significant tip arrived from a taxi driver named Harold Thomas. Thomas recognized the victim's description from newspaper headlines and told police that he had picked up the girl, who was noticeably short, along with a uniformed U.S. Marine at the corner of 10th Street and D Street Northwest at around 9:15 p.m., the current site of the FBI headquarters building today. The driver overheard the girl say that she was hungry and tell him to take them to the Hot Shop, a restaurant locally known for its burgers and root beer floats. The Marine asked the driver for a couple of cigarettes, which Thomas provided, the same brand of cigarette that matched the butts found at the crime scene. The Marine then leaned over and whispered to the driver to take them to Haynes Point instead, which the driver obliged. Upon arrival at Haynes Point, near the golf course, the Marine paid the driver, and the pair exited the car. The last words the driver heard were the girl inquiring as to where they were and why they had stopped there. The next morning, The driver found a black switchblade knife on the back seat where the Marine had sat. The blade had the initials J.H. on it. Investigators came upon a Marine named Warren Craven, who had pertinent information to share. He explained how he and two Marines, James Westbury and Earl McFarland, had been hanging out the night Dorothy had gone missing. But Earl McFarland had left Craven and Westbury inside Jimmy Lake's restaurant after he struck up a conversation with a rather short-statured woman on the street corner outside. Craven and Westbury both witnessed the pair get into a taxi and leave the area altogether. In addition, Craven and Westbury both confirmed that the belt with the twisted prong looked like the one McFarland had worn and provided a photo of the trio taken just a few days earlier in uniform to prove it. The pair further stated that they knew McFarland had the knife with him that evening because he had brandished it in front of them. As for the initials J.H. on the knife, they had seen them but could not speak to their significance. In the coming weeks, authorities tracked down a former Marine who had served with Earl McFarland while in the Solomon Islands. This new Marine confirmed that the knife was indeed his and had lent it to McFarland but never got it back. His name was John Holberger, but his friends called him J.H. As for the black leather belt, authorities discovered that it too had been borrowed from another Marine and had not been returned. Come to find out, Ernest Tkach, whose name was on the backside of the belt, had recovered in the same Australian hospital as McFarland after the Battle of Guadalcanal. Tkach had borrowed the belt to McFarland and had never gotten it back. Police found Earl McFarland at the barracks and took him to the police station for questioning in Washington, D.C. The 21-year-old Marine had enlisted in 1941 and had served overseas in Australia and in the South Pacific War Theater. A veteran of the Battle of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, McFarland had since been transferred back to Washington and now served as a barracks guard. McFarland did admit to police that he met and talked to a short and stubby girl on the evening Dorothy Berrum went missing, but denied leaving in a taxi with her or committing any crimes against her. He explained that after exchanging small talk about how a female friend of hers had stood her up, the two had parted ways, and he went to a local bar to drink a few beers. When he was shown a photo of himself wearing a belt with a bent prong, as well as a purchase receipt for a new Marine replacement belt from the day Dorothy's body was found, McFarland became highly agitated and angrily snapped at the investigators. He said, "I'm in the grease, but I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn if they put me in the hot seat tomorrow. What do you expect me to do, jump up and admit everything with all these other Marines walking around?" On Saturday, October 7th, the day after Dorothy's body was discovered on the golf course, Earl McFarland was formally charged with her murder. Despite how quickly the case had come together, Chief Kelly and his investigators felt that they were missing something when it came to McFarland. While the Washington, D.C. police continued to build their case against Earl McFarland, the remains of 18-year-old Dorothy Berrum were shipped by train back to her hometown of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. On the morning of Wednesday, October 11th, numerous friends and family, community dignitaries, and members of the Notre Dame McDonnell Alumni Association greeted the train as it arrived at the station in Chippewa Falls. Accompanying the casket was Dorothy's father, Roy, who had traveled out to D.C. to bring his daughter home, and her two former classmates and fellow civil service workers, Betty Germain and Kathleen Cosgrove. Dorothy's remains were taken to the Mason Funeral Home in downtown Chippewa Falls. The next day, a funeral service was held in front of a packed crowd at Notre Dame Catholic Church, followed by the interment of her mortal remains in Hope Catholic Cemetery on the city's East Hill. Her family, parents Roy and Mary, and siblings Richard, Homer, and Mary Ann, were devastated. What kind of monster could have done this to their dear Dorothy? As investigators dug further into Earl McFarland's past, they were surprised to learn that McFarland wasn't even his real name. He had used an alias to conceal his real identity, as past criminal activity would have precluded himself from enlisting in the military. Originally born Earl Jack Dills in Maryville, Tennessee, Dills had been a troublesome kid from a broken home. While several details about his past are not definitively known, Dills spent 2 years in a Tennessee state juvenile facility as well as a stint in a Tennessee state prison. Using his adopted mother's maiden name, Dills changed his name to Earl Jack McFarland so he could enlist in the Marines. In 1942, while stationed in North Carolina, McFarland met a donut shop employee named Doris Dudley. After a brief courtship, they married, and by all accounts had 2 children together, but were recently estranged from one another. McFarland was shipped out to the Pacific Theater and served valiantly in the Battle of Guadalcanal. The victory was significant militarily, but also cost the lives of 6,000 dead or wounded servicemen. Eventually, McFarland was assigned to barracks guard duty back in Washington, D.C. His service at Guadalcanal aside, McFarland's official military personnel file references numerous run-ins with military authorities. Between January of 1943 and October of 1944, McFarland was written up for missing shifts, being unfit for duty, bringing liquor into his guard post, and disorderly conducts received while in Washington, D.C. During one of the disorderlies just 2 months earlier, McFarland was accused of slashing another soldier with his knife after an argument. His most egregious offense came approximately 1 year prior to the death of Dorothy Berrum, where he was cited for drunkenness, creating a disturbance, disorderly conduct, using obscene language, resisting and striking patrol officers in the military, and insulting civilian women ashore. His punishment was 5 days in the brig, with only bread and water to sustain him. Chief Kelly was more than confident that they had gotten their man. McFarland was a lifelong criminal, lacked basic empathy for others, was addicted to alcohol, maintained a deep aversion to authority, displayed repeated acts of physical violence, and showed a lack of decency and humanity for women. The question he and investigators now faced was this: did McFarland also violate and kill Margaret Fitzwater? On Sunday morning, September 24, 1944, just 13 days prior to the murder of Dorothy Berrum, the nude and mutilated body of 63-year-old housewife Margaret Fitzwater was found floating in the Pentagon Lagoon, a backwater of the Potomac River just on the opposite side of Haynes Point and the golf course. Fitzwater had endured severe trauma to her face and had been sexually violated, with her throat cut with a sharp knife. The man whom police charged with the crime was 66-year-old Gardner Holmes, a restaurant cook who lived on a floating shanty just feet from where Fitzwater had been found. It was Holmes, in fact, known by locals as Pops, who contacted the police as he was the first person to see her body floating in the lagoon. Although Holmes had a well-documented history of mental illness, including breaking out of a mental institution, the evidence police had against him was dubious at best. With Earl McFarland now in custody for the murder of Dorothy Berrum, Chief Kelly and investigators were having second thoughts about Holmes. One of the most credible tips they had received about Fitzwater came from a waitress at the hot shop, who had sworn that she had seen the much older Fitzwater with a younger man dressed in a Marine uniform. She remembered serving them each 2 cups of coffee prior to them leaving the restaurant, and recalled that he smelled of alcohol. The waitress even identified Fitzwater's photograph from a lineup. Police largely ignored the waitress's account at the time and charged Gardner Holmes with the murder of Fitzwater. But when police went back to talk to the waitress with a photo of Earl McFarland in hand, the waitress was able to immediately identify him as the man she saw that night. The charges against Holmes were dropped, and McFarland was formally indicted for the murder of Margaret Fitzwater. The criminal trial of McFarland and the murder of Dorothy Berrum started on January 29, 1945. Since Washington, D.C. is not situated within any state, criminal acts within the city fall under the jurisdiction of the federal courts. District Judge James McPherson Proctor presided while a jury of 11 men and 1 woman heard the evidence. Over the coming days, the prosecution called 20 different witnesses to recreate Dorothy Berrum's travels that night, as well as McFarland's presence within that timeline. Dorothy had been stood up by a female friend that night, Eleanor Courtwright, who fell ill but had no way of contacting her friend. The prosecution's key evidence were eyewitness testimonies: the leather belt with the twisted buckle prong and the knife with the initials J.H. McFarland's defense was predicated largely on the taxi driver's inability to pick his face out of a lineup, and his history of trauma and mental illness from having contracted malaria, or malarial psychosis as it was called by his attorneys, at Guadalcanal. They argue that he was still receiving injections of quinine while he was being held in the city's jail. To tug at the jury's sense of patriotism, McFarland was dressed in his Marine uniform, with the Guadalcanal patch on the shoulder. McFarland also decided to take the stand himself and denied all of the charges against him during cross-examination. He did admit to seeing the short and stubby girl in front of Jimmy Lake's restaurant, but nothing more. He admitted to having a temper at times, and that ever since contracting malaria in Guadalcanal, he had been suffering from spells, episodes, and night terrors. Later testimony from his sisters seemed to back up these claims. On the fourth day of the trial, both sides rested their cases. The prosecution closed by calling McFarland's defense a joke, pointing out that thousands of soldiers contract malaria and are not on the streets violating and killing women. They finished by calling McFarland a tough hombre, cold, mean, and vicious, who would definitely strike again if the jury let him go. The defense finished by pleading with the jury to consider the groundbreaking research that had been done in the area of mental illness, and that this was their opportunity to recognize the legitimacy of malaria psychosis. To do so, they argued, would help future soldiers from suffering a similar fate, as they called upon the jury to find him not guilty on a reason of insanity. The jury deliberated for 70 minutes and returned their verdict. It was unanimous. Earl McFarland was found guilty on all three charges against him, carrying with it an automatic death sentence via the electric chair. As the verdicts were read, McFarland gave a smile and then winked to his attorneys. The execution date was set for June 26th. In the days following his conviction and sentencing to death, Earl McFarland faced an additional trial for the murder of Margaret Fitzwater. But due to his impending death sentence, the prospects of that case moving forward were in doubt. In the meantime, McFarland's legal team sought an appeal for a new trial, citing pretrial prejudice and introducing a new witness. This new witness claimed to have seen Dorothy Berrum alive with a civilian near the golf course, while placing a drunken McFarland in a separate area of Haynes Point. This testimony was complicated by the witness's female companion, who refuted his account, stating the drunken soldier they saw was husky, unlike the trim McFarland. In early summer, the U.S. Appeals Court officially took on McFarland's appeal, but quickly affirmed the lower court's findings. Undeterred, McFarland's defense lawyers submitted their final long-shot appeal to the United States Supreme Court. On January 14, 1946, the Supreme Court announced that it would not be reviewing his case. With McFarland's legal options completely spent, a last plea for clemency was sought from President Harry S. Truman, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military. Even though Truman wasn't interested, the parents of Dorothy Berrum, Roy and Mary, left nothing to chance. They partnered with the popular United States Senator and Chippewa Falls hometown hero Alexander Wiley to make sure Truman heard from both sides. Wiley was folksy, educated, and a trusted voice in Washington, D.C. Despite being from opposite parties, Truman and Wiley always had a respectful relationship with each other. Getting clemency from Truman was always a pie-in-the-sky proposition for McFarland, but Wiley was going to ensure that that door was locked tight. While everyone waited on word from the White House, no one could have predicted what happened next. Around 5 a.m. on the morning of April 3, 1946, 2 death row inmates and mass murderers escaped from the federal jail in Washington, D.C., and were on the run. The 2 guards on shift overseeing the death row block had let Earl McFarland and Joseph Medley, convicted of killing 3 red-haired women, out of their cells to play 3-handed 500 rummy cards with them. When guard O.C. Sanderlin complained of a headache during the card game, convict Medley recommended he go lie down on his jail cell bed, which he did. As the game continued, the other guard, H.C. Davis, got drowsy during the game and began to doze off. At that moment, both convicts simultaneously jumped Davis and then went into the cell and got Sanderlin. Both guards were gagged with towels, tied up, using antenna wire from a radio. After finding a can opener, the two men cut into the jail's ventilation shaft and used it to scale up to the roof. Using a few soiled bed sheets tied together as a makeshift rope, they rappelled down the wall of the building. Once on the ground, the two men agreed to split up. Medley wanted to use the river to hide his scent from the jail's bloodhounds, while McFarland ventured toward the nearest railroad track to find a train to hop. Once authorities got wind of the escape, teams of police with bloodhounds searched the area. Roughly 7 hours after the escape, Joseph Medley was found near a boathouse on the river, sleeping inside of a small tunnel. He offered no resistance and was taken back to the jail. McFarland, however, was nowhere to be found. As Earl McFarland's trail turned cold, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the United States Marshal Service, and multiple state patrol departments began their manhunt. The two locales authorities focused on were Berne, North Carolina, home to his children and ex-wife, Doris, who was recently granted a divorce shortly after his conviction, and Knoxville, Tennessee, the area where his family, friends, and acquaintances lived. Despite many tips and reported sightings, McFarland remained elusive. 8 days after his escape, in Knoxville, Tennessee, an FBI agent in an automobile spotted McFarland standing on the corner of Gay and Magnolia Streets. Just 1 block away from the city's jail, McFarland was patiently awaiting a streetcar when he was taken into custody without resistance. McFarland told authorities that he returned to Knoxville to get cash from people he knew before his eventual exit from the country. While awaiting transfer back to Washington, McFarland answered questions from the press in his jail cell in Knoxville. He reminisced about his hell-raising youth, robbing stores, and escaping from reform school 9 times. He reveled in his time in the Marines, where he killed numerous Japanese at Guadalcanal before getting injured and sent home. He argued that life had been going pretty well for him until he got falsely convicted of raping and slaying the government girl. When asked about breaking out of a D.C. jail, he grinned, shook his head, and admitted to slamming the door on one of the guards. He sure looked funny behind those bars, he declared, with a big grin covering his face. Days later, U.S. Marshals transferred McFarland back to Washington. 3 months after his jailbreak, and while still awaiting execution on death row, McFarland received a response to the clemency request his lawyers had submitted to the Justice Department and President Truman. It was denied. He then requested, through the press, that Truman use him as a human guinea pig in the next atomic bomb test in the Pacific Ocean. Unofficially, that too was denied. The date of the execution was now July 19th, or just 15 days away. For his final request, he quipped, "All I need now is some fried chicken and a really good can opener." The day before his execution, McFarland was visited by Presbyterian minister Dan Potter, who baptized McFarland and delivered communion. His spirit was at ease, Potter said. He made his peace with God. Immediately following, McFarland was visited by his sister and one of her children, although the details of that conversation are not known. He finished the evening with his last meal, which is a fried chicken dinner with so many leftovers that he shared the food with the other men on death row. His final statement on the death of Dorothy Berrum was as follows: "I never killed Dorothy Berrum. I never knew her, and I didn't kill any other woman. All I ever killed was Japs." On the morning of his execution, July 19th, 1946, McFarland ate a breakfast of eggs and ham, 2 pieces of toast, and 2 cups of coffee. McFarland's demeanor hadn't deviated 1 iota from his usual self. He was cocky, self-assured, arrogant, unremorseful, and wisecracking as per the usual. Empathy was not something that McFarland seemed to possess. As he entered the death chamber, he did so with a swagger at 10:02 a.m., wearing a blue work shirt and blue dungarees. While puffing a cigarette and boldly walking toward the chair, he nodded to the guards and the doctor before sitting down without hesitation. He proceeded to bend over and assist the guards in strapping himself into the device, including the arrangement of the metal headpiece that sat on his shaved head. He took 2 final puffs from the cigarette and flicked it across the room. As the guard adjusted the chin strap on the headpiece with the electrode, he pulled too hard. McFarland winced, smiled, and muttered, "Take it easy," his final words on this earth. The electric current was turned on and left running for 2 minutes. Prison doctor Barton Cannon walked over to the slumped McFarland and pronounced him dead at 10:12 a.m. In the aftermath of Earl McFarland's execution, his sister bought a burial plot and had him buried in Newmarket, Tennessee. McFarland had wanted the corneas of his eyes donated, but his family refused that request. Later that year, Joseph Medley, McFarland's fellow jailhouse escapee and murderer, was executed in the same chair on December 20th for the death of Nancy Boyer. For the Barum family in Chippewa Falls, the news of McFarland's execution was viewed as welcome relief. While Roy and Mary Barum were not the type of people to wish death on another human being, the pain and horror their daughter had experienced, coupled with the uncertainty and fear they felt after his escape, ultimately brought them a sense of relief that McFarland couldn't hurt anyone else again like he had their daughter. In addition, the media sensation surrounding his jailbreak and execution, including the stacks of fan mail and letters he received, sent largely by women, was finally over. Throughout all the frenzy, the life and memory of their beloved Dorothy had noticeably been forgotten. With him finally gone, some semblance of peace arrived to the family. Roy Barum died in 1958 at the age of 65, and Mary lived to be 90, passing away in 1986. Both were buried next to their two daughters, Mary and Dorothy, who had both been taken from them way too young. On the same day that Dorothy Berrum was announced murdered on the front page of her hometown newspaper in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, Roy and Mary published a poem alongside that served as an homage to their beautiful, intelligent, and dutiful daughter. Titled "Safely Home," it read, "In loving memory of Dorothy Marie Berrum, safely home. I am home in heaven, dear ones. Oh, so happy and so bright. There is perfect joy and beauty in this everlasting light. All the pain and grief is over, every restless tossing past. I am now at peace forever, safely home in heaven at last. Did you wonder I so calmly trod the valley of the shade? Oh, but Jesus' love illumined every dark and fearful glade. And he came himself to meet me in that way so hard to tread, and with Jesus' arm to lean on, could I have one doubt or dread? Then you must not grieve so sorely, for I love you dearly still. Try to look beyond earth's shadows, pray to trust our Father's will. There is work still waiting for you, so you must not idly stand. Do it now while life remaineth, you shall rest in Jesus' land. When that work is all completed, he will gently call you home. Oh, the rapture of that meeting, oh, the joy to see you come. Mr. and Mrs. R.S. Barum and family.